Pay homage to the Blessed One, supremely enlightened. Sadhu, sadhu. Let's pay homage to our teacher, Lokaswami Maharaj. Sadhu.
The birth. In the past, a king named Kasi Raja ruled justly in Benares. He had 16,000 wives, but not one among them conceived either son or daughter. The citizens assembled as in the Jātaka, saying, "Our king has no son to keep up his line." And they begged the king to pray for a son. The king commanded his 16,000 wives to pray for sons, but though they worshipped the moon and the other deities and prayed, they obtained none. Now his chief queen, Chanda Devi, the daughter of the king of the Madhas, was devoted to good works, and he asked her also to pray for a son. So on the day of the full moon, she took upon herself the Uposatha precepts, and while lying on a little bed, as she reflected on her virtuous life, she made an assertion of truth in these terms: "If I have never broken the precepts, by the truth of these, my protestation, may a son be born to me." Through the power of her piety, Saka's dwelling became hot. Saka, having considered and ascertained the cause, said, "Chanda Devi asked for a son. I will give her one." So he looked for a suitable son. He saw the Bodhisattva. Now the Bodhisattva, after having reigned 20 years in Benares, had been reborn in Usada hell, where he had suffered for 80,000 years, and had then been born in the world of the 33 gods. And after having stayed there his allotted period, he had passed away therefrom and was desirous of going to the world of the higher gods.
Readers in your reading. So what is going on here? Now the Saka has found a deity, and he's going to invite the deity to be born in the human world as the son of Chanda Devi, right? And so who is this deity? Buddha to be Bodhisattva. And what was his journey like? He reigned 20 years in Benares. So he was the king in Benares for how many years? 20 years. And what did he collect by ruling the Benares for 20 years?
Akusala karma.
He collected lots of demerits. As a result, had been reborn in the Ussada hell. Imagine even a Bodhisattva is reborn in the worst plane of misery, in hell, Ussada hell. And how many years did he suffer there? 20 years?
80,000 years.
So he ruled Benares only for 20 years. But he repaid, having been born in hell, he suffered for 80,000 years. That's how this karma results in. Like, remember we learned before about a woman who killed a goat for the meal. She beheaded a goat, just one goat. And how she repaid for that? She took rebirth in hell, suffered there for years and years, and the rest of the karma followed her. Every time when she was reborn as an animal, 500 times she was reborn as an animal, and every life the animal was killed animal was beheaded, right? So that is how bad karma ripens. It's not like you kill somebody, you kill one person, and you are going to be you're going to get killed only once in the same way. That's not how karma works. Because we know about how the merit ripens, the good karma ripens. We talk a lot about it. Even if we do a very minor thing, very little help to somebody, you're not going to reward very little happiness. You're going to gain and experience great happiness. So that's how this natural law works in the world. So even a little bad karma generates dangerous results. Even a little good karma generates amazing, great, powerful, happy results, right? So he ruled Benares for 20 years and had to suffer in hell for 80,000 years as a result of his ruling. He suffered in hell and had then been born in the world of the 33 gods. So he suffered there, he repaid his bad karma, and then another good karma came to the surface as soon as his bad karma is extinguished in the hell. And there was lots of good karma also following him, because he did lots of good karma in his past lives. So he repaid for his bad karma, and now this good karma brought him to the gods of the Tower Tinsa. So he was reborn as a heavenly being. That's how this karma works, right? And this karma, you don't know which karma appears next, and this karma sends you here and there. And after having stayed there, he passed away, and now he was desirous of going to a world of higher gods. But now the Sakka is going to invite him to be born in the human world. Who is going to read next?
Now,
May I?
can I?
Okay, Vani.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Sakka went up to him and said, "Friend, if you are born in the world of men, you will fully exercise the perfection, and the mass of mankind will be advantaged. Now this chief queen of Kasi Raja, Chanda, is praying for a son. Do you be born in her womb?" He consented and came attended by 500 Deva Buddhas, and was himself conceived in her womb. While the other Devas were conceived in the wombs of the wives of the king's ministers. The queen's womb seemed to be full of diamonds. When she became aware of it, she told it to the king, who caused every care to be taken for the safety of the unborn child, and at last she brought forth a son endued with auspicious marks. On the same day, 500 young nobles were born in the ministers' houses. At that moment, the king was seated on his royal dais, surrounded by his ministers, when it was announced, "A son is born to you, O king." At hearing it, eternal affection arose, and piercing through his skin, reached to the marrows in his bones. Joy sprang up within him, and his heart became refreshed. He asked his ministers, "Are you glad at the birth of my son?" "What are you saying, sire?" They answered, "Before we were helpless, now we have a help. We have obtained a lord." The king gave orders to his chief general, "A retinue must be prepared for my son. Find out how many young nobles have been born today in the ministers' houses." He sought the 500 and went and told it to the king. The king sent princely dresses of honor for the 500 young nobles, and he also sent 500 nurses. He gave moreover 64 nurses for the bodhisattva. all free from the faults of being too tall and so on, with their breasts not hanging down and full of sweet milk. If a child drinks milk, sitting on the hip of a nurse who is too tall, its neck will become too long. If it sits on the hip of one too short, its shoulder bone will be compressed. If the nurse be too thin, the baby's thighs will ache. If too stout, the babe will become bow-legged. The body of a very dark nurse is too cold, of one very white is too hot. The children who drink the milk of a nurse with hanging breasts have the ends of their noses flattened. Some nurses have their milk sour, others have it bitter, and so on. Therefore, avoiding all these faults, he provided 64 nurses, all possessed of sweet milk, and without any of these faults. And after paying the Bodhisattva great honor, he also gave the queen a boon. She accepted it and kept it in her mind. On the day of naming the child, they paid great honor to the Brahmins who read the different marks and inquired if there was any danger threatening. They, beholding the excellence of his marks, replied, "O king, the prince possesses every mark of future good fortune. He is able to rule not one continent only, but all the four. There is no danger visible." The king, being pleased, when he fixed the boy's name, gave him the name Temiya Kumara, since it had rained all over the kingdom of Kasi on the day of his birth and had been born wet, Temiya. When he was 1 month old, they adorned him and brought him to the king. And the king, having looked at his dear child, embraced him and placed him on his hip and said, playing with him, "Now at that time, 4 robbers were brought before him. One of them he sentenced to receive 1,000 strokes from whips barbed with thorns, another to be imprisoned in chains, a third to be smitten with a spear, the fourth to be impaled." The Bodhisattva, on hearing his father's word, was terrified and thought to himself, "Ah, my father, through his being a king, is becoming guilty of a grievous action which brings men to hell." The next day, they laid him on a sumptuous bed under a white umbrella, and he woke after a short sleep, and opening his eyes beheld the white umbrella and the royal pomp, and his fear increased all the more, and asked to be pondered, "From whence have I come into this palace?" By his recollection of his former birth, he remembered that he had come from the world of the gods, and that after that he had suffered in hell, and that then he had been a king in that very city. While he pondered himself, "I was a king for 20 years, and then I suffered 80,000 years in the Usada hell. And now again, I'm born in this house of robbers. And my father, when 4 robbers were brought before him, uttered such cruel speech as must lead to hell. If I become a king, I shall be born again in hell and suffer great pain there." He became greatly alarmed. His golden body became pale and faded like a lotus crushed by the hand. And he lay thinking how he could escape from that house of robbers.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We rejoice in your reading, Vani. Now you see how terrified the Bodhisattva is, the Prince Temiya, and because he was the Bodhisattva, and also the god of Sakka, king of the gods, had an intention. Remember, when he invited the Bodhisattva to be born in the human world, he encouraged him to go to the human world and fulfill his perfections to the Buddhahood. Perfection means the paramita, means vast amount of good qualities, cultivation of generosity, compassion, patience, equanimity, renunciation, determination, all these noble qualities, lots of, to a greater degree, these good qualities should be cultivated in that individual who is destined to be the enlightened one. Because this baby was not an ordinary baby, that baby, this child has some kind of a memory to recollect at least 2 past lives, right? You see, sometimes even today you hear some stories about children recollecting their past lives. Have you heard about those stories? And some kids, they recollect their past lives, maybe 1 past life or 2 past lives. So in this case also, this child had that ability, and he understood. He came from heaven and he went to heaven from hell, and he know the reason and everything. Now he saw that in the future he is going to be the king again. So he was very upset. He was terrified. He knew that he's going to make bad karma and going to repay again. Who is going to continue?
May I?
Okay.
Then a Devatita who dwelt in the umbrella and who in a certain previous birth had been his mother comforted him.
Okay, so
Fear
let me explain something here, Harry. So the deity who dwelt in the umbrella, that means Ittadevata. Sometimes in past lives, the people who lived with you, your relatives, have been born in the heavenly world. And when you are in trouble or when you need help, they come to help you. And when we share merit with them after a meal offering to the Mahasangha, we especially share merit with those deities because they are very loyal to you and they have lots of compassion for you, and they are your blood relatives from past lives. So what is happening here also, this something like that. There was a deity, female deity inhabited in that palace, and that deity was this princess' past life mother, and now has been reborn as a deity. And she knew the pain in the baby's mind, the child's mind, and so the deity is talking to the child now. If you have any questions or if anything is not clear, please turn on your mic and ask. Okay, so we can discuss when we go along. Okay, Harry, you can continue.
Okay, Bante. But Bante, why is he dwelling in the umbrella?
No, that's a kind of the way of telling that the deity is inhabited in that room where the prince was living, because there in king's palaces there was a specific umbrella, decorated umbrella, which always was held over the prince, the royal prince, giving protection to the royal prince.
Thank you, Bante.
So that
Okay.
another way of telling that the deity was so close to the prince.
Fear not, my child Temiya. If you really desire to escape, then pretend to be handicapped. Although not really so, though not deaf, pretend to be deaf, and though not dumb, pretend to be dumb. Putting on these characteristics, show no signs of intelligence. So she uttered the first verse. Show no intelligence, my child. Be as a fool in all men's eyes. Content to be the scorn of all, thus shall you gain at last the prize. Being comforted by her words, he uttered the second verse. Devata, I will do your will. What you command me is the best. Mother, you wishes for my will, you longest but to see me blessed. And so he practiced these three characteristics.
Oh, very interesting reading. Okay, dear Dhamma friends, now you can see here the advice from her previous mother. What is the advice? She knew that the child badly wanted to escape from his destiny of becoming the next king. So she advised him to pretend to be handicapped, to pretend to be deaf, to pretend to be dumb, right? And show no signs of intelligence. What will happen? If the prince can practice like this, if the prince can live like this, he will not be chosen, right, as the next king. But it's kind of impossible task to be fulfilled, right? How can you do like that when you are really not deaf, not dumb, not handicapped? How can you act like that? How can you pretend like that? It's a very difficult challenge. But let's see what's going to happen next. Who is going to read?
I can read, Bhante.
Okay, Ben.
His youth, the king, in order that his son might lose his melancholy, had the 500 young nobles brought near him. The children began crying for the milk, but the Bodhisattva, being afraid of hell, reflected that to die of thirst would be better than to reign, and did not cry. The nurses told this to Queen Chanda, and she told it to the king. He sent for some Brahmins skilled in signs and omens and consulted them. They replied, "Sire, you must give the prince his milk after the proper time has passed. He will then cry and seize the breast eagerly and drink of his own accord." So they gave him his milk after letting the proper time pass by. And sometimes they let it pass by for once, and sometimes they did not give it to him all through the day. But he, stung by fear of hell, even though thirsty, would not cry for milk. Then the mother or the nurses gave him milk, though he did not cry for it, saying, "The boy is famished." The other children cried when they did not get the milk, but he neither cried nor slept, nor doubled up his hands nor feet, nor would he hear a sound. Then his nurses reflected, "The hands and feet of a handicapped man are not like this. The formation of the jaws of the dumb is not like this. The structure of the ears of the deaf is not like this. There must be some reason for all this. Let us examine into it." So they determined to try him with milk, and so for one whole day they gave him no milk. But though parched, he uttered no sound for milk. Then his mother said, "My boy is famished, give him milk." And she made them give him milk. Thus, giving him milk at intervals, they spent a year trying him, but they did not discover his weak point. Then saying, "The other children are fond of cakes and dainties. We will try him with them." They set the 500 children near him and brought various dainties and placed them close by him. And telling them to take what they liked, they hid themselves. The other children quarreled and struck one another and seized the cakes and ate them. But the Bodhisattva said to himself, "O Temiya, eat the cakes and dainties if you wish for hell." And so in his fear of hell, he would not look at them. Thus, even though they tried him with cakes and dainties for a whole year, they discovered not his weak point. Then they said, "Children are fond of different kinds of fruit," and they brought all sorts of fruit and tried him. Other children fought for them and ate them, but he would not look at them. And thus for a whole year they tried him with various kinds of fruit. Then they said, "Other children are fond of playthings," so they set golden and other figures of elephants and so on near him. The rest of the children seized them as if they were spoiled, but the Bodhisattva would not look at them. And thus for a whole year they tried him with playthings. Then they said, "There is a special food for children 4 years old. We'll try him with that." So they brought all sorts of food. Other children broke them in pieces and ate them. But the Bodhisattva said to himself, "O Temiya, there is no counting of the past births when he did not obtain food." And for fear of hell, he did not look at them, until at last his mother, with her heart well-nigh rent, fed him with her own hand. Then they said, children 5 years old are afraid of the fire. We will try him with that. So having had a large house made with many doors, and having covered it over with palm leaves, they set him in the middle, surrounded by the other children, and set fire to it. The others ran away shrieking, but the Bodhisattva said to himself that it is better than the torture in hell, and remained motionless, as if perfectly apathetic. And when the fire came near him, they took him away. Then they said, children 6 years old are afraid of wild elephants. So they had a well-trained elephant taught, and when they had seated the Bodhisattva with other children in the palace court, they let it loose. On it came trumpeting and striking the ground with its trunk and spreading terror. Other children fled in all directions in fear for their lives. The Bodhisattva, being afraid of hell, sat where he was, and the well-trained animal took him and lifted him up and down and went away without hurting him. When he was 7 years old, as he was sitting surrounded by his companions, they let loose some serpents with their teeth extracted and the mouths bound. Other children ran away shrieking, but the Bodhisattva, remembering the fear of hell, remained motionless, saying, it is better to perish by the mouth of a fierce serpent. Then the serpents enveloped his whole body, and they spread their hoods on his head, but still he remained motionless. As though they tried him again and again, they could not discover his weak point. Then they said, boys are fond of social gatherings. So having set him in the palace court with the 500 boys, they caused an assembly of mimes to be gathered together. The other boys, seeing the mimes, shouted, bravo, and laughed loudly. But the Bodhisattva, saying to himself that if he were born in hell, there would never be a moment's laughter or joy, remained motionless as he pondered on hell and never looked at the dancing. Thus trying him again and again, they discovered no weak point in him.
Can you imagine the determination? Like, it's already extraordinary, right? And this is not the extraordinary life of an enlightened being. This is a bodhisattva, and this is not a matured human being. This is a child. When somebody is shocked with the perils of this samsara, how much energy they can produce within themselves. That is the powerful lesson here. That is the lesson we are going to learn from this. And the same thing happened in his last life when he took rebirth as the Prince Siddhartha. Not only in this life, he was shocked about the pains in the samsara. Now, in this case, he is shocked about the suffering in hell. And when he was Prince Siddhartha, he was shocked with the suffering of old age. He was shocked with the suffering of sickness. He was shocked with the suffering of death. He was shocked with the suffering of separation from loved ones. Why? It is because of wisdom. Wise people are shocked with the impermanence of life. Wise people are shocked with the uncertainty of the conditioned things of life. And they don't stop there only by being shocked. They look for a solution. They become truth seekers. That is the difference. It is not familiar to us because we see old people, we see sick people, we see people dying, and we do our ordinary things. We laugh, we dance, we do ordinary things, and we forget. We forget about those things. What do we forget? We forget the truth of life. That is what happened in this long journey of samsara again and again. We forgot the truth of life. Because of forgetting the truth of life, we experience the consequences. What is the consequence of forgetting the truth? Falling into misery again and again. So here the Bodhisattva is terrified about his future. We can't even imagine the determination. And how did that determination come about? It's because of seeing the nature of this samsara, right? And he has sacrificed all the royal pleasure with his pursuit of escaping from this rebirth in hell. He has sacrificed everything. He's a royal prince and he can experience the maximum human happiness in the royal palace. And he is sacrificing all of these things. This is the courage, this is the patience that we should imitate. Who is going to read next?
I can read Bhante.
Okay, Rob.
Then they said, "We will try him with the sword." So they placed him with the other boys in the palace court. And while they were playing, a man rushed upon them, brandishing a sword like crystal and shouting and jumping, saying, "Where is the devil's child of the king of Kasi? I will cut off his head." The others fled, shrieking in terror at the sight of him. But the Bodhisattva, having pondered on the fear of hell, sat as if unconscious. The man, although he rubbed the sword on his head and threatened to cut it off, could not frighten him, and at last went away. Thus, though they tried him again and again, they could not discover his weak point. When he was 10 years old, in order to try whether he was really deaf, they hung a curtain around a bed, made holes in the four sides, and placed conch blowers underneath it without letting him see them. All at once they blew the conch. There was one burst of sound, but the ministers, though they stood at the four sides and watched by the holes in the curtain, could not through a whole day detect in him any confusion of thought or any disturbance of hand or foot, or even a single start. So after a year had passed, they tried him for another year with drums. But even thus, though they tried him again and again, they could not discover his weak point. Then they said, "We will try him with a lamp." So in the nighttime, in order to see whether he moved hand or foot in the darkness, they lighted some lamps in jars, and having extinguished all the other lamps, they put these down for a while in the darkness, and then suddenly lifting the lamps in the jars, created all at once a blaze. And watching his behavior, but though they thus tried him again and again for a whole year, they never saw him move even once. Then they said, "We will try him with molasses." So they smeared all his body with molasses and laid him in a place infested with flies and stirred the flies up. These covered his whole body and bit it as if they were piercing it with needles, but he remained motionless, as if perfectly apathetic. Thus they tried him for a year, but they discovered no weak point in him. Then when he was 14 years old, they said, "This youth, now he is grown up, loves what is clean and abhors what is unclean. We will try him with what is unclean." So from that time, they did not let him bathe or rinse his mouth or perform any bodily ablutions until he was reduced to a miserable plight, and he looked like a released prisoner. As he lay covered with flies, the people came round and reviled him, saying, "O Temiya, you are grown up now. Who is to wait on you? Are you not ashamed? Why are you lying there? Rise up and clean yourself." But he, remembering the torments of hell, Gutha, lay quietly in his squalor, And though they tried him again and again for a year, they discovered no weak point in him. Then they put pans of fire in the bed under him, saying, when he is distressed by the heat, he will perhaps be unable to bear the pain and will show some signs of writhing. Boils seemed to break out on his body, but the Bodhisattva resigned himself, saying, the fire of hell, Avisi, flames up 100 leagues. This heat is 1,000 times preferable to that. So he remained motionless. Then his parents, with breaking hearts, made the men come back and took him out of the fire and implored him, saying, O Prince Temiya, we know that you are not in any way handicapped from birth, for handicapped men have not such feet, face, or ears as you have. We gained you as our child after many prayers. Do not now destroy us, but deliver us from the blame of all the kings of Jampupita.
Sadhu, sadhu. We rejoice in your reading, Lord. That's how he bears the unbearable. Okay, here. Who is going to read next?
But they can read.
Okay.
But though thus entreated by them, he lay still motionless, as if he heard them not. Then his parents went away weeping. And sometimes his father or his mother came back alone and implored him. And thus they tried him again and again for a whole year, but they discovered no weak point in him. Then when he was 16 years old, they considered whether it be a handicapped man or deaf and dumb, still there are none who, when they are grown up, do not delight in what is enjoyable and dislike what is disagreeable. This is all natural in the proper time, like the opening of flowers. We will have dramas acted before him and will thus try him. So they summoned some women full of all graces and as beautiful as the Deva Kanyas. And they promised that whichever of them could make the prince laugh or could entangle him in lustful thoughts should become his principal queen. Then they had the prince bathed in perfumed water and adorned like a Devaputta and laid on a royal bed prepared in a suite of royal chambers like the dwellings of the gods. And having filled his inner chamber with the mingled fragrance of perfumed wreaths of flowers, incense, unguents, spirituous liquor, and the like, they retired. Meanwhile, the women surrounded him and tried hard to delight him with dancing and singing and all sorts of pleasant words. But he looked at them in his perfect wisdom and stopped his inhalations and exhalations in fear lest they should touch his body, so that his body became quite rigid. They, being unable to touch him, said to his parents, his body is all rigid. He is not a man, but must be a yaka. Thus his parents, though they tried him again and again, discovered no weak point in him. Thus, though they tried him for 16 years with the 16 great tests and many smaller ones, they were not able to detect a weak point in him. Then the king, being full of vexation, summoned the fortune tellers and said, when the prince was born, you said that he has fortunate and auspicious marks. He has no threatening obstacle, but he is born handicapped and deaf and dumb. Your words do not answer to the facts. Great king, they replied. Nothing is unseen by your teachers, but we knew how grieved you would be if he told you that the child of so many royal prayers would be all ill luck. So we did not utter it. What must be done now? O king, if this prince remains in this house, 3 dangers are threatened, namely to your life or your royal power or the queen. Therefore, it will be best to have some unlucky horses yoked to an unlucky chariot, and placing him therein to convey him by the western gate and bury him in the charnel ground. The king assented, being frightened at the threatened dangers. When the Queen Chandadevi heard the news, she came to the king. My lord, you gave me a boon and I have kept it unclaimed. Give it to me now. Take it, O queen. Give the kingdom to my son. I cannot, O queen. Your son is all ill luck. Then if you will not give it for his life, give it to him for 7 years. I cannot, O queen. Then give it to him for 6 years. For 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year. Give it to him for 7 months. For 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 months, 1 month, for half a month. I cannot, O queen. Then give it to him for 7 days. Well, said the king, take your boon. So she had her son adorned, and the city being gaily decorated, a proclamation was made to the beat of a drum. This is the reign of Prince Temiya, and he was seated upon an elephant and led triumphantly rightwise round the city, with a white umbrella held over his head. When he returned and was laid on his royal bed, she implored him all the night. Oh, my child, Prince Temiya, on your account for 16 years, I have wept and taken no sleep, and my eyes are parched up, and my heart is pierced with sorrow. I know that you are not really handicapped or deaf and dumb. Do not make me utterly destitute. In this manner, she implored him day after day for 5 days. On the 6th day, the king summoned the charioteer, Sunanda, and said to him, early tomorrow morning, yoke some ill-omened horses to an ill-omened chariot, and having set the prince in it, take him out by the western gate and dig a hole with 4 sides in the charnel ground. Throw him into it, and break his head with the back of the spade and kill him. Then scatter dust over him and make a heap of earth above, and after bathing yourself, come here. That 6th night, the queen implored the prince, oh, my child, the king of Kasi has given orders that you are to be buried tomorrow in the charnel ground. Tomorrow, you will certainly die, my son. When the Bodhisattva heard this, he thought to himself, oh, Temiya, your 16 years labor has reached its end. And he was glad, but his mother's heart was as it were cleft in twain. Still he would not speak to her lest his desire should not attain its end. At the end of that night, in the early morning, Sunanda, the charioteer, yoked the chariot and made it stand at the gate. And entering the royal bedchamber, he said, O queen, be not angry. It is the king's command. So saying, as the queen lay embracing her son, he pushed her away with the back of his hand and lifted up the prince like a bundle of flowers and came down from the palace. The queen was left in the chamber, smiting her breast and lamenting with a loud cry. Then the Bodhisattva looked at her and considered, if I do not speak, she will die of a broken heart. But though he desired to speak, he reflected, if I speak, my efforts for 16 years will be rendered fruitless. But if I do not speak, I shall be the saving of myself and my parents. Then the charioteer lifted him into the chariot and saying, I will drive the chariot to the western gate. He drove it to the eastern gate, and the wheel struck against the threshold. The Bodhisattva, hearing the sound, said, my desire has attained its end, and he became still more glad at heart. When the chariot had gone out of the city, it went a space of 3 leagues by the power of the gods. And there the end of forest appeared to the charioteer as if it were a charnel ground. So thinking it to be a suitable place, he turned the chariot out of the road, and stopping it by the roadside, he alighted and took off all the Bodhisattva's ornaments and made them into a bundle and laid them down, and then taking a spade began to dig a hole.
Very interesting reading, Linda. So, dear Dhamma friends, what are they going to do? What is he going to do now? He's going to dig a hole. He already started digging the hole, and he's going to put the Prince Temi in that hole, because everybody concluded that this boy was a useless boy. Yes. So they are going to bury him alive. And did you notice here, when the prince realized that he was rejected, he was not going to be given the kingship, was he sad or was he happy?
He was happy, Bhante.
He was so happy. It's completely opposite from the world we live in, right? He was happy when he realized that he was rejected. This is extraordinary. He could let go of everything because he just saw one life in hell, only one life, imagine. But as the enlightened one, the Buddha, not only he saw only one life in hell, he saw uncountable lives in hell. In one individual's life, past story, in one individual's life, he saw countless times in hell that certain individual. Countless times in the animal realm, in one individual's journey. Countless times in the ghost world, in one individual's journey. Having understood that, having seen that with his own divine eye, he proclaimed this samsara, the cycle of birth and death, is endless. Anamataggo yang sansaro, pubbā kotina paññāyati. The beginning point cannot be discerned, cannot be found. No one can say, before this point, you didn't have suffering. After this point, your suffering started. No one can say that. No one can see that. And Buddha explained about the stream of tears that every individual has shed in this long journey of samsara when they are faced with calamity and disaster. Buddha saw and explained about the stream of blood we shed when we got killed in this long journey of samsara. And that after attaining enlightenment, seeing countless lives. But here, Prince Temi only saw one life in hell, just a small part of the journey. But still, he was so determined not to enjoy the worldly pleasures, not to be intoxicated, infatuated with all the ordinary happiness, temporary happiness, worldly pleasures. Why? Because of his wisdom. Now this man has started to dig the hole to bury the prince alive. Okay, but now is the time the prince feels happier. When he was in the palace, he was always terrified, at the same time determined not to move his hands, body, not to speak even a single word, not to show any emotions. Like, this is truly paramita. This is truly paramita. This is aditthana paramita. the paramita of determination. Only extraordinary beings can do that. That's why they end up by being extraordinary Buddhas. So please understand, we are reading the story of an extraordinary being. We shouldn't compare with ordinary beings. If we compare with ordinary beings, we think that this is impossible. This didn't happen. Because it's not in the ordinary world. What do we see in the ordinary world? We see this endless pursuit behind sensual pleasures, material things, nothing else. This is from the extraordinary life. And in order to save beings from this endless suffering, an extraordinary being should appear in the world. That is why we need an enlightened being to be born into this world to save others from suffering. Ordinary beings cannot do that. Who is going to read the last part? Barry, you can start reading.
Then the Bodhisattva thought, this is my time for effort. For 16 years I have never moved hands nor feet. Are they in my power or not? So he rose and rubbed his right hand with his left, and his left hand with his right, and his feet with both his hands, and resolved to alight from the chariot. When his foot came down, the earth rose up like a leather bag filled with air, and touched the hinder end of the chariot. When he had alighted and had walked backwards and forwards several times, he felt that he had the strength to go 100 leagues in this manner in one day. Then he reflected, if the charioteer were to set against me, should I have the power to contend with him? So he seized hold of the hinder end of the chariot and lifted it up as if it were a toy cart for children, and said to himself that he had power to contend with him, and as he perceived it, a desire arose to adorn himself. The renunciation. At that moment, Saka's palace became hot. Saka, having perceived the reason, said, Prince Temiya's desire has attained its end. He desires to be adorned. What has he to do with human adornment? And he commanded the Devaputa Visakama to take heavenly decorations and to go and adorn the son of the king of Kasi. So he went and wrapped the prince with 10,000 pieces of cloth and adorned him like Saka with heavenly and human ornaments. The prince, decked with all the bravery of the king of the Devas, went up to the hole as the charioteer was digging, and standing at the edge, uttered the third verse. Why in such haste, O charioteer, and wherefore do you dig that pit? Answer my question truthfully. What do you want to do with it? The charioteer went on digging the hole without looking up and spoke the fourth verse. Our king found his son handicapped and dumb, an idiot quite, and I am sent to dig this hole and bury him far out of sight. The Bodhisattva replied, I am not deaf nor dumb, my friend, not handicapped or lame am I. If in this wood you bury me, you will incur great guilt thereby. Behold these arms and legs of mine, and hear my voice and what I say. If in this wood you bury me, you will incur great guilt today. Then the charioteer said, Who is this? It is only since I came here that he has become as he describes himself. So he left off digging the hole and looked up. And beholding his glorious beauty, and not knowing whether he was a god or a man, he spoke this verse. A heavenly minstrel or a god, or are you Saka, Lord of all? Who are you, pray? Whose son are you? What shall we name you when we call? Then the Bodhisattva spoke, revealing himself and declaring the Dhamma. No Gandhava, nor a Deva, nor Saka, Lord of all am I. I am the king of Kasi's son, whom you would bury ruthlessly. I am the son of that same king, under whose sway you serve and thrive. You will incur great guilt today, if here you bury me alive. If 'neath a tree I sit and rest, while its shade and shelter lends, I would not break a single branch, only the sinner harms his friends. The sheltering tree, it is the king. I am the branch that tree has spread, and you the traveler, charioteer, who sits and rests beneath its shade. If in this wood you bury me, great guilt will fall upon your head. But though the Bodhisattva said this, the man did not believe him. Then the Bodhisattva resolved to convince him, and he made the woods resound with his own voice and the applause of the gods as he commenced these 10 verses in honor of friends. He who is faithful to his friends may wander far and wide. Many will gladly wait on him. His food shall be supplied. Whatever lands he wanders through, in city or in town, he who is faithful to his friends finds honor and renown. No robbers dare to injure him, no warriors him despise. He who is faithful to his friends escapes all enemies. Welcomed by all, he home returns. No cares corrode his breast. He who is faithful to his friends is of all kin the best. He honors and is honored too. Respect he takes and gives. He who is faithful to his friends, full meed from all receives. He is by others honored, who to them due honor pays. He who is faithful to his friends wins himself fame and praise. Like the fire he blazes brightly forth and sheds a light divine. He who is faithful to his friends will with fresh splendor shine. His oxen surely multiply, his seed unfailing grows. He who is faithful to his friends reaps surely all he sows. If from a mountain top he falls, or from a tree or grot, he who is faithful to his friends finds a sure resting spot. The banyan tree defies the wind, girt with its branches rooted round. He who is faithful to his friends does all the rage of foes confound. Even though he thus discoursed, Sunanda did not recognize him and asked who he was. But as he approached the chariot, even before he saw the chariot and the ornaments with the prince wore, he recognized him as he looked at him, and falling at his feet and folding his hands, spoke this verse. Come, I will take you back, O prince, to thine own proper home. Sit on the throne and act the king, why in this forest roam? The great being replied, I do not want that throne or wealth, I want not friends nor kin, since 'tis by evil acts alone that I that throne could win. The charioteer spoke, a brimful cup of welcome, prince, will be prepared for you, and your two parents in their joy great gifts will give to me. The royal wives, the princes all, merchants and Brahmins to both, great presents in their full content will give me, nothing loath. Those who ride elephants and cars, foot soldiers, royal guards, when you returnest home again, will give me sure rewards. The country folk and city folk will gather joyously, and when they see their prince return, will presents give to me. The great being spoke, my parents I was left forlorn by city and by town. The princes left me to my fate, I have no home my own. My mother gave me leave to go, my father me forsook. Here in the forest, wild alone, the ascetic's vow I took. As the great being called to mind his own virtues, delight arose in his mind, and in his joy he uttered an exalted utterance. Even to those who hurry not, the heart's longing wins success. Know, charioteer, that I today have gained ripe holiness. Even by those who hurry not, the highest end is won. Crowned with ripe holiness I go, perfect and fearing none. The charioteer replied, your words, my lord, are pleasant words. Open your speech and clear. Why were you dumb when you did see father and mother near? The great being spoke, no handicapped man, I for lack of joints, nor deaf for lack of ears. I am not dumb for want of tongue, as plainly now appears. In an old birth I played the king, as I remember well, but when I fell from that estate, I found myself in hell. Some 20 years of luxury I passed upon that throne, but 80,000 years in hell did for that guilt atone. My former taste of royalty filled all my heart with fear. Thence was I dumb, although I saw father and mother near. My father took me on his lap, but midst his fondling play, I heard the stern commands he gave, at once his miscreant slay. Saw him sunder, go, that wretch, impale without delay. Hearing such threats, well might I try be handicapped and dumb to be, and wallow helplessly in filth, an idiot willingly. Knowing that life is short at best and filled with miseries, who gainst another for its sake would let his anger rise? Who on another for its sake would let his vengeance light? Through want of power to grasp the truth and blindness into the right. Even to those who hurry, not the highest end is won. Crowned with ripe holiness I go, perfect and fearing none. Then Sunanda reflected, this prince, abandoning all his royal pomp, as if it were carrion, has entered into the wood, unwavering in his resolve to become an ascetic. What have I to do with this miserable life? I too will become an ascetic with him. So he spoke this verse. I too would choose the ascetic life with you. Call me, O prince, for I as you would be. When thus requested, the great being reflected, if I at once admit him to the ascetic life, my father and mother will not come here, and thus they will suffer loss, and the horses and chariot and ornaments will perish, and blame will accrue to me, for men will say, he is a Jātaka. Has he devoured the charioteer? So wishing to save himself from blame and to provide for his parents' welfare, he entrusted the horses and chariot and ornaments to him and spoke this verse. Restore the chariot first, you're not a free man now. First pay your debts, they say, then take the ascetic's vow. The charioteer thought to himself, if I went to the city and he meanwhile departed elsewhere, his father and mother, on hearing my news of him, would come back with me to see him. And if they found him not, they would punish me. So I will tell him the circumstances in which I find myself, and I will get his promise to remain here. So he spoke 2 verses. Since I have done your bidding, Prince, I pray, do you be pleased to do what I shall say. Stay till I fetch the king, stay here of grace. He will be joyful when he sees your face. The great being replied, well, be it as you say, charioteer. I too would gladly see my father here. Go and salute my kindred all and take a special message for my parents' sake. The man took the commands. He clasped his feet and, all due honors paid, started to journey as his teacher bade. The meeting. At that moment, Chanda Devi opened her latisan as she wondered whether there were any tidings of her son and looked on the road by which the charioteer would return. She saw him coming alone and burst into lamentation. The teacher has thus described it. Seeing the empty car and lonely charioteer, the mother's eyes were filled with tears, her breast with fear. The charioteer comes back. My son is slain. Yonder he lies, earth mixed with earth again. Our bitterest foes may well rejoice, alack, seeing his murderer come safely back. Dumb, handicapped, could he not give one cry, as on the ground he struggled helplessly? Could not his hands and feet force you away, though dumb and maimed while on the ground he lay? The charioteer spoke, promise me pardon, lady, for my word, and I will tell you all I saw and heard. The queen answered, pardon I promise you for every word. Tell me in full whatever you saw or heard. The charioteer spoke, not handicapped, he is not deaf. His utterance is clear and free. He played fictitious parts at home through dread of royalty. In an old birth, he played the king as he remembers well, but when he fell from that estate, he found himself in hell. Some 20 years of luxury he passed upon that throne, but 80,000 years in hell did for that guilt atone. His former taste of royalty filled all his heart with fear, hence was he dumb, although he saw father and mother near. Perfectly sound in all his limbs, faultlessly tall and broad, his utterance clear, his wits undimmed, he treads on heaven's road. If you desire to see your son, then come at once with me. You shall behold Prince Temiya, perfectly calm and free. But when the prince had sent the charioteer away, he desired to take the ascetic vow. Knowing his desire, Saka sent the Devaputta Visakama, saying, Prince Temiya wishes to take the ascetic vow. Go and make a hut of leaves for him and the requisite articles for an ascetic. He hastened accordingly, and in a grove of trees 3 leagues in extent, he built a hermitage furnished with an apartment for the night and another for the day, a tank, a pit, and fruit trees, and he prepared all the requisites for an ascetic and then returned to his own place. When the Bodhisattva saw it, he knew that it was Saka's gift, so he entered into the hut and took off his clothes and put on the red bark garments, both the upper and under, and threw the black antelope skin on one shoulder, and tied up his matted hair, and, having taken a carrying pole in the shoulder and walking staff in his hand, he went out of the hut. Then he walked repeatedly up and down, displaying the full dress of an ascetic, and having spoken his exalted utterance, "Oh, the bliss, oh, the bliss," returned to the hut, and sitting down on the ragged mat, he entered upon the 5 super knowledges.
Very just in your reading, Barry. So that is how the Bodhisattva in one of his past lives, he rejected the royal kingship and renounced the palace with great determination and became an ascetic. Isn't that a beautiful story? When we hear the stories of attachment, clinging, craving, desires in this ordinary world, when the ordinary world is full of the stories of craving, attachment, clinging, isn't that pleasing to the ears to hear the story of such a renunciation, such a detachment, such a letting go? Isn't that a pleasing thing to hear? That is how he practiced paramita of determination, perfection, aditthana paramita, perfection of determination. Yes, Rob.
Yeah, it's a powerful story, Bhante.
Yeah.
There's one, he talks about leaving by the western gate, but in the end he left by the eastern gate instead of the western gate. I'm just wondering what's the significance of that little change.
Yeah, so in the ancient time, when the king impose punishment on criminals, always they are to be carried away from the western gate, because at that area, the western side was the charnel ground, the punishment area, the criminal side. Very like unlucky, unauspicious area was always in the west side. Like, so in the western gate, they will leave with the executioners. So in this case, unusual thing happened. Then he had to leave from the eastern gate. Maybe, I think maybe the heavenly beings, he got involved there. And also we can think that he was not a criminal. He was not an unauspicious child. He was not an unlucky, unfortunate boy, young man. He was truly an auspicious, blessed, lucky, fortunate young man. So I think all this, the meritorious power enabled him to leave from the eastern gate. That makes sense, right?
I see. Thank you, Bhante.
Good job. Linda, you have a question?
Yes, Bhante. Following Rob's questions, Bhante, is that something to do with the four great king, the Kumbhanda's king, the Viroha? And the second question, Bhante, is
yeah, there is some relationship with the four great kings in respected directions.
Bhante, also the other question is, when we pretend to do something, does that not consider lying, Bhante? When we pretend, like Temiya, Prince Temiya, he pretended.
In this case, it's only determination.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Bhante.
Lying is always a verbal misconduct. Don't forget that. Sumana, you have a question?
Bhante, when Temiya king said to the charioteer that you are not a free man now, and go back and repay your debt, does that mean?
Because he was still the servant of the king.
Yeah.
He was under the commands of the king, so he's not freed from that.
Yeah.
If he's going to be freed, then he will be punished by the king. So the Temiya prince has the compassion for him.
Bhante, so my question is about the Buddha. The Buddha seemed to have repaid all of his debt for his parent. So is that the Buddha repay it by going forward? Or how do we repay it until we have no debt and so we can go forward?
Not everybody can repay their parents. That's definitely the truth. But as the enlightened Buddha, with extraordinary knowledge of awakening, Buddha realized there is a way to repay parents. Before telling that, Buddha explained, children cannot repay their parents by any material means, by giving food, clothing, money, housing, or any worldly pleasures. Even Buddha went on to say that even children offer the entire earth to their parents. Still, children cannot repay their parents. Why? Because parents are so helpful for their children. Even though children cannot repay their parents with material gifts, Buddha explained there is a way to repay one's parents, and that is by giving the gift of Dhamma. if a child can give the gift of Dhamma to their parents who do not know the Dhamma, and those children can repay their parents. Why? Because of receiving that gift of Dhamma from the children, the parents will permanently escape from rebirth in planes of misery. That is why those children did the greatest service to their parents.
So the Buddha have to repay it for like many
Buddha
lifetimes.
already, yeah, Buddha escaped from that debt because Buddha directed his mother and father to not only to escape from planes of misery. Buddha helped his father, King Suddhodana, to become an arahant. King Suddhodana is one of the luckiest lay people who attained the liberation while wearing the lay clothes. He attained the arahantship, Buddha's father. And then you remember Buddha's mother passed away just after giving birth, 7 days after, right? Buddha's Prince Siddhartha's birth. So after attaining enlightenment, Buddha visited his mother in heaven, and back then that was the mother Deva, and she was reborn as a male deity there. Buddha went there, preached the Dhamma, and the deity attained stages of enlightenment. So definitely Buddha helped his parents to escape from the entire suffering and attain Nibbana. Not only to the parents, Buddha helped relatives, his son, lay life son, his wife, lay life wife, right? Princess Yasodhara, and an entire retinue of his relatives. They all attained stages of enlightenment, escape from planes of misery. Yeah, Buddha helped many humans and devas out of compassion, limitless compassion. Okay, and I also wanted to encourage all of you to read the Mūgapakkha Samyutta and reflect on the true nature of samsara and why we should, to understand why we should practice the Noble Eightfold Path, and how we should understand that Noble Eightfold Path is the only solution for the suffering in the world. That's very important. I wanted to highlight that. So let me show you where to find the Mūgapakkha Samyutta. So you go to suttafriends.org website, suttafriends.org website, and then you maybe you can type Mūgapakkha. Yeah, just type ANAMA, Anama, and you get the Mūgapakkha Samyutta here. In that sutta, you can read these amazing suttas about the true nature of samsara. How many mothers have we had in this samsara? How many fathers have we had in this samsara? We have shed many tears in this long samsara. We have drunk so much mother's milk in this long samsara. It is hard to imagine the length for an eon, and so on. So please read these. We all have been mothers, we all have been fathers, we all have been brothers, we all have been sisters, we all have been sons, we all have been daughters. History cannot be unseen, but samsara has continued. There is a beautiful collection of suttas here. Buddha explained with extraordinary knowledge so that others can understand the true nature of the samsara, and they can strive towards the solution to find an end to this suffering. And we are very lucky because Buddha has shown us the solution. If we didn't know the solution, we are the truly unlucky ones. So there is a solution, and solution is available, and there are Kalyana Mittas there who teach you the Dhamma, who share you the Dhamma, and who help you to practice the path. And the suttas have been translated into your own language. Suttas have been well preserved by grateful people, enlightened beings who lived in the past, and kind Bhantes, kind teachers have translated the suttas. Everything is available. So that's why we should be happy. That's the only reason we should be happy, that the Dhamma is available, path is available, solution is possible. Sadhu. Sadhu.
Bante, may I ask a question?
Harry?
Yes. Just a quick one. So what actually did the Bodhisattva did that made him to reborn for 80,000 years in hell? So is it because of the
what he did? What he did was what is done by the rulers around the world. Nothing special.
Okay, so Bante, if it's the 20 years of kingship before in his past life, now this time he has a chance to come back and become a king. Why did the Bodhisattva didn't think that this is a second chance and maybe he can become a much better king and avoid what he did before? I'm just wondering.
He already knew it's a huge challenge to become a righteous king. It's so difficult, and his fear about his mistakes was always bothering him. So he didn't want to take the risk, and he chose the ascetic life instead. He saw remember, as soon as he took up the robes, he went into the woods. How did he feel? Oh, what a bliss. Oh, what a bliss. There are no bodyguards to protect him. There are no mansions to live in. There are no comfortable things to sleep on, right? There are no delicious food in the forest, but he felt the real happiness there. Oh, what a bliss. Oh, what a bliss. So he already understood when he was in the palace the difference between the royal happiness and the happiness of a renunciant. So that mind cannot be changed. Okay, Harry?
Yes, thank you, Bante.
So yeah, we should develop confidence in the enlightened one and his path to become enlightened. This is the path to becoming enlightened. This is the path. These are the things he practiced as a Buddha to be. Wouldn't that end like this? Can't we think that if somebody practice like this, definitely that being should attain enlightenment? Isn't that clear now? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.